You're listening to the New Jersey Real Estate Investor Podcast. We talk about all topics related to being a real estate investor in the Garden State, based on our experiences with buying, selling, managing, and building rentals. So together, we can all be better investors. Now, here is your host, Pete Tverdov.
Hey guys, welcome back to the New Jersey Real Estate Investor Podcast. I'm your host, Pete Tverdov. I got Andrew Spina back in the house with me today. And today we're going to talk about how immigration affects housing. This is a little bit of a controversial topic, but I think it's a really good topic to talk about. It's something I've wanted to talk about for a while, especially because I feel like we've noticed a couple things over the last several years. And I think it'd be good to give our own anecdotal experience and also, just to share some things we've seen online and in the news and so on and so forth. So
it affects all of us.
Yeah. So, all right. So today we're going to talk about three different parts of housing that I believe illegal immigration affects. And we're not here to talk about whether you politically, what people care about. We're talking about how it affects housing, guys, right? Because it does affect housing 100%. So we're going to talk about construction a little bit, how that affects it. We're going to talk about the rental market and how that affects it. And then lastly, we're going to talk about sales and how we see that affecting it. And specifically in New Jersey, how we see it. I'm sure it could apply to other states. So I guess I would start off by saying New Jersey certainly has a healthy amount of illegal immigrants, right? It's obviously, we're right next to New York City. It's very easy to fly here and then overstay a visa or, just kind of blend into the overall population. New Jersey, generally it has a Democratic governor. So, and they tend to be a lot more friendly towards illegal immigration. You have most of the mayors in the major cities. I don't think, you could correct me if I'm wrong, I don't know if any mayor in New Jersey has declared them a sanctuary city off the top of my head.
So.
Yeah.
I can't name that.
Yeah. I want to say Jersey City maybe did, or somebody like that. But so, so what I would say is in New Jersey, if you're not here legally, it's probably kind of a good place to hide versus Texas or Arizona where they, they obviously really crack down on that. So, the first thing I want to talk about is construction and how illegal immigration is affecting construction and, what I'm seeing, what I'm hearing, especially now that the Trump administration is cracking down on illegal immigration. Him and his boy, Tom Homan, are, rounding people up, so to speak. They're actually raiding construction sites. Have you read about that at all?
I have, yeah.
Yeah. I don't know who they're deciding to target or why, but I actually anecdotally, I heard about a crew in New Brunswick who a buddy of mine who's doing a building, one of his subs, his crew I guess is all illegal immigrant labor, and he doesn't have a sub now because they're they got deported. So so what I would tell you guys about construction is, number one, obviously when you have cheap labor, right, it's going to drive down wages, and that's probably why they that's probably one of the reasons why we had more of an open border the last 4 years. I'm not saying that's right, but that was to dilute the labor pool, and bring in cheap labor, right? Which helps, but it also hurts, right? Because everybody loves cheap stuff, but it hurts the working class guy who, really should be probably making $40 an hour to frame the house, but this, illegal immigrant's going to do it for $25. And by the way, he's going to get paid cash and he's not going to pay taxes on that.
And he's not going to take a bathroom break.
Right. Well, yeah. And that brings a good point too. That kind of leads to safety issues and things like that. And the person on the construction site who's illegal is probably not going to complain or say too much because they don't want to, raise any issues.
Yeah. Yeah. It kind of compromises the safety and standard policies that have probably been put in place for good reason. And then you have those native born guys out there who are being undercut left and right because you can't compete with someone who's going to do it for half the price. And you certainly can't compete if you're competing against, the whole world. If anyone can just come in and, throw their labor in.
Right. So what I know is, everyone has a budget when they're doing construction, right? Because like that's one of the services that we offer. So people love asking me like, what does that cost per square foot to build, right? And the answer is not that like, me and my brother go out and look for illegal immigrants. We don't do that. But like your subs that you hire in construction, like they might have one or two guys who are probably not there legally. And the counter argument to that is like, let's say you're doing a roofing job, right? So if you guys could picture, you got, 4 or 5 guys up on the roof and they got these like yellow shovels and they're shoveling the shingles off the roof, right? And all the shingles are falling on the plastic. Somebody down below is walking with a trash can to put like, the shingles in the can. So like who's doing that and how much are you paying them, right? Because like I'll tell you, like labor, like people want like $200 a day is like very cheap if you could get it.
Yeah.
Average is like $250, and then some people tell me $300, but $300 is expensive
for a guy. You're talking
for a guy for like 8 hours of labor. So if you do $300 divided by 8 hours, it's like $35 an hour. That's a lot of money.
Yeah.
So anyway, the point I'm making is like for like very like low end jobs where you just need somebody putting trash in a trash can at a construction site, like that sub, when he's got a team of 4 or 5, like the 5th person might just be like an illegal immigrant who kind of does that.
Right.
And then the other subs where they have like really good pricing and really cheap labor, there's usually a reason why. And the answer is likely sometimes that like, because the whole crew is not here legally.
Right.
So that, I guess that helps the person who's paying for the construction, right? Because people want cheap, but it hurts like the other people who are here legally, who are doing things the right way. So what I've noticed with, or at least the argument has been with like deportations, is like, oh well, the cost of construction is going to rise, right? Which might be true. That's hypothetically, it may be. Yeah, it sounds it because there's a labor shortage in the trades, as we've kind of talked a little bit about in the podcast. But is that actually going to happen? I don't know, because if you think about it, let's say like enough deportations happen where there's just not enough framing crews, there's not enough masonry crews. Those guys are probably going to raise their prices because there's less supply for those crews. There's more demand, right? But then I feel like that's the beauty about economics. Like supply and demand kind of has like a natural balance for the most part. So I think that'll be interesting to see how that plays out. I think it's a little too early to say right now.
Yeah. Also, I think it's important to note, especially when you talk about like those sort of like menial jobs, like you're mentioning about like getting the trash can and chucking the debris, like who's going to do that? I think one thing people always overlook is it used to be teenagers.
I know, dude. Like
teenagers would cut grass. Teenagers would be a gopher. Like that's been completely replaced by some guy from Guatemala. I mean, I get it. That's a whole other argument. But like those entry-level, low-rung jobs on the ladder were for teenagers. And now you don't see teenagers cutting grass in the summer anymore.
No, they're too busy on their club team.
Well,
or at extra tutoring for what I'm serious, for whatever. So quick funny story about that. So 5 years ago when I was first getting into construction, I hired like a cheap guy to do demo, which was really stupid, right? Because demo is like dangerous.
It's like you have to be
like
precise.
He had no insurance. It was probably like a bunch of illegals for all I know, right? I just torpedoed my gubernatorial aspirations, by the way. This is going to get held against me. Right. But anyway, so, I hired this guy and, they were just a bunch of clowns. And like, there was like this homeless guy who used to like ask for money, blah, blah, blah. And then like 2 days later, I'm like checking in on the demo site and this homeless guy was there with the trash can, dumping stuff in the dumpster. And I walk on the site, it's like, what are you doing here? And he's like, what do you mean I'm doing here? What am I doing here? I'm working. And I turned to the guys like, bro, that guy's like a drug addict. What did you? He's like, he was asking for money. I gave him $50 and he said he wanted to work for the day. I'm like,
yeah, all right.
I'm like, all right. So, but anyway, like we're kind of getting off topic, but the basically it's hard it is hard to find people who want to work and do like dig ditches, so to speak, right? So I do understand people like, the argument like, oh, well, only illegal immigrants will do that. I would argue that's nonsense. That's why they have the visa program in place. Like the same people for like picking strawberries and all that stuff, right? Yeah. So the same would apply to housing, and that's got to come from the federal government. But right now we're talking about the Trump administration and deportation. So what I would say is, I still think it's to be determined how that's going to play out with construction. Okay. Yeah. So moving on to the next part of housing, rentals. This is what I want to talk about a little bit. And I think it applies to a lot of you listening, because there's, hopefully a lot of real estate investors here in New Jersey listening to this podcast. And this would apply to, obviously people outside of New Jersey as well. So for starters, people who live here illegally, you said this something when we were talking before we went live. It's like, what type of housing do they rent, and like just maybe talk about some of those things.
So they're typically going to gravitate towards subpar housing for a number of reasons. One, they can't get like the necessary credit and background checks that a higher end rental would require. So they're going to go to something that's a little bit more informal. Okay. And because of their status in this country and whatever their personal economic situation may be, they're going to rent for something a little bit more on the low end side in terms of rental rates. Okay. So now you have a class of illegal immigrants that are gravitating towards semi-formal, cheaper end rentals. And because of their immigration status, it's very understandable to see why they would not be reporting certain hazardous conditions, that they wouldn't be necessarily going to the town to report something wrong. So they sort of allow a situation where you have precarious housing that they're filling, and that housing could potentially be kind of dangerous because they feel too scared to maybe report the issue to the housing authority.
And why do you think that is?
Because they're afraid of deportation. They're afraid of outing themselves. Even though in this particular state, like, they don't really concern themselves with like immigration status. If you're calling to be like, hey, my heat's not working and it hasn't been working for some time. But it allows these conditions to persist and thrive because you have this sort of like this shadow class of people who are just going to go along with things. They're not going to raise a fuss. They're not going to raise any concerns. Sometimes they need to be raised. Like if something is not safe for habitability, like that should be addressed. Them just constantly embedding themselves in these properties, it's, it could be a recipe for disaster.
Yeah, I will say a lot of the crummier houses that I've looked at, whether I'm looking with home buyers or it's somebody calling us up asking for help to manage their property. Like the crummier houses, like it's likely like at least immigrants, living there. I don't know if they're legal or illegal, obviously.
Yeah.
But yeah, I think you're right. Like, because people kind of get away with murder with that, with like the landlords, and then also you got to think. Like an illegal immigrant is much more likely to rent from a mom and pop landlord than like a company.
Yeah.
Right.
That's going to run the necessary.
Now I will say like we've rented to some illegal immigrants, and we'll talk about that in a minute, but they're more likely to rent from a mom and pop landlord because a lot of these people, they have no credit. Right. They work a cash job. Like we just talked about, right? Like the guy hangs drywall for a living, or he's a landscaper, gets paid cash. He works at a bakery. He's a fry cook, whatever it is. Like he's one of those jobs. So income kind of makes it. And some landlords, that's all they care about. Income, good. Yep, you're in. I'm not going to ask questions. Yeah. I don't care who lives there.
I don't care if you just pay driver's license.
Oh, and by the way, you could pay me the rent in cash.
Yeah.
Right. So like the landlord loves that. They put it in their pocket. They never tell Uncle Sam that it's rented.
Yep.
Right. Like remember we used to deal with a couple landlords who were like, remember, like we're not gonna mention their name, but oh, so and so picks up the rent in cash from those houses every month, right?
Oh, yeah.
And
it's going right in their pocket.
Yeah, exactly. So, so mom and pop landlords, I feel like the sketchier ones where they have like sketchy housing, like they're happy to house those people. Yeah. And I will say there is almost a, how do I say this? There's like a multi-step process that I've noticed with, and this is not just illegal immigrants. This is like immigrants in this country I've noticed with rentals. So like step one is they just got here from whatever country and they rent a room, whether it's in a rooming house or it's like a 3-bedroom apartment and the family living there is subletting one of the rooms out to help, make ends meet.
Yep.
So they rent out a room. And why do I know this? Because like when we're doing the background check on renters, legal or illegal, you need to know, like, where'd you last live? How much are you paying? And so, if they put like $700, like, okay, well, there's no, like, what's that about? You call them up, oh, I rented a room. Okay, that makes sense. Like, I've noticed that a lot. And then they go from renting a room to maybe an apartment, right? Like they work decent jobs, they work hard, and now they have an apartment. And then eventually, if they're really lucky, they'll rent like a single family house. And that's almost like the equivalent of like the American dream for people who could afford to buy a house.
No, it is. Yeah.
Right. So that's kind of the progression that I've noticed. Anything else that have you noticed with like respect to rentals and illegal immigration, and especially this year with the deportations that have been happening?
Well, the one thing we didn't touch on was the tendency to overcrowd.
100%.
Like they tend to overcrowd the units. You just kind of see it coming a mile away because they're all splitting the rent. You know what I mean? Like you said, they already have kind of precarious employment.
Some of the sales that, sorry to interrupt you, some of the sales that I've seen, like there was like a 2-bedroom house I was selling, and the guy was paying like $1,200 for a 2-bedroom. He was like month to month. And then he had like 2 other people sleeping in the attic. And the seller was like, oh, this guy's really giving me a hard time, to leave and blah, blah, blah. I was like, yeah, I bet he is, because he's probably getting paid to live in his own apartment, dude.
Yeah, we've dealt with that a number of times.
Yeah. Well, that seems to be like the specialty that we inherit. Like we inherit these, these problems from landlords. Like, I can't take this anymore. And then like we have to kind of,
they rent out rooms and then they end up turning a profit on the rental.
Yeah.
So it's not just they're paying to live somewhere. It's like they're making money off of your property.
Yep.
I mean, it's good for landlords in the sense we were discussing this earlier, where you have a finite supply, a finite amount of rentals, but then you have the demand ever increasing as you have more and more people coming in. So you have a fixed supply and an increasing demand, and it.
Well, yeah. So let's talk about that. So I personally noticed under the Biden administration, where illegal immigration was a lot more lax, I would see a surge of rental demand in certain towns and cities in New Brunswick that we managed in, where it was like immigrant heavy, and also where we didn't, but like, where I would talk to other investors in here. So for example, like immigrant heavy off the top of my head would be like Patterson, areas of Newark, Elizabeth, Perth Amboy, New Brunswick. Those are like 5 quick ones off the top of my head, right? Where it was very similar to the housing market. Like you put a for sale sign in the ground and it was like, knocking the French fries over at the boardwalk and all the pigeons come, right? Yeah. So like rentals was kind of similar to that. And you bring up a good argument, because when you have illegal immigration, like they are in theory taking housing away from someone who is here legally, or who immigrated here and is on has a green card or a work visa or did things the right way. So that has an effect on everything, I would argue, right? Because like now that they've taken housing units away, there's less units for working class people or people who are just kind of following the immigration laws, right? On the flip side, since Trump came in 6 months ago, I don't know if this is a coincidence, but we've talked about this on the show. Like I've seen softer rental markets, and I didn't say this in front of you, but the last show I did, I talked about the rental market in Elizabeth, which is a heavy like immigrant city. Okay. There was almost 170 active rentals in Elizabeth last month. That's crazy, dude. It's not New York City. Yeah. It's a quote unquote city, but it's not got like 1 million people. Like 170 rental units, and why would that be? Right. So if you think about it, like if I'm living in the United States illegally and I'm scared to death of like getting deported, I'm probably cool where I'm living. I don't want to go put a rental application in. I don't want to like stick my neck out.
Yeah.
I don't want to share banking information and anything.
Yeah, it might get flagged.
100%.
I mean, I can understand the paranoia, that line of thinking.
Me too, man. Like it's almost like you're a fugitive, like you're hiding, right? Like you don't. Yeah. And then you hear these stories of like deported. So like So I personally think that's had an effect this year on housing with rentals. 100%. 100%. And I also think it had an effect on the at least a partial effect on the surge in rental demand 4 years ago. So yeah, and then the other thing I would quickly touch on is, and this is actually a direct quote from someone from the Federal Reserve, like the Board of Governors, one of the members of the Board of Governors in the Federal Reserve. And this was like maybe 9 months ago. All right. Given the current low inventory of affordable housing, the inflow of new immigrants to some geographic areas in the United States could result in upward pressure on rents. Right. So like we go back to what I was saying, you can't build enough affordable housing. It's almost impossible to build affordable housing. I should probably do a podcast on that as to why. So for these affordable units or like working class rental units, like we were just talking about, when you have illegal immigration, that takes that away from people who, are either immigrated here correctly or on a work visa or live here. Yeah. Right. So, and that all put an upward pressure on housing. So I argue now that the tide is going back out and deportations are happening and people are less willing to move, I actually think it's put downward pressure on rents, and it's going to make rentals, it is making rentals a little bit more affordable for people, at least in 2025. That's what I've noticed.
Yeah. Well, that's good.
I would say that is good for renters. And I guess the last topic I would touch on with the rentals is that, they don't have a social security number and they don't have an ITIN number. So like, how do you rent to them?
Right.
Right. And I said earlier, like we've placed people who are here illegally in a rental unit. Yeah. Why, Pete? Well, okay. Well, they got three times the rent, or they have like really good rental income, right? Because like this guy's a framer and his wife, whatever, does childcare, works at a daycare center, or does whatever. But like they make enough income. Okay, can you get a cosigner? Yes, they give a cosigner. Like, okay, to me that's no different than somebody who they make the income and they have a 610 credit score. We're like, it's a little low. Can you get a cosigner?
Yeah.
Right. So, and I go back to this, like when it doesn't matter where you fall in that debate, but like at the end of the day, like they have to live somewhere. Right. So like if they're applying, like, okay, unless they come up with a law that's like, you cannot rent to these people, you will be fined.
Right.
Okay. That's different. But like and that's us being a management company. So like Joe Schmo landlord who, oh man, I can't miss 1 month of mortgage payment. I'll die. Right. Yeah. Like he needs his place rented. So I don't even think they go that far, but,
and you can't, similar to labor and housing, it's really difficult if you're competing with the world. If you have no border and you have no country, right? Because there's no border and borders kind of define countries, you're up against anyone that can get here in terms of trying to find a rental, in terms of trying to find an entry-level job.
Well, yeah. And actually the other point is you said about like habitability. And I've noticed this as I've traveled more in the world. Like, if you see like some of the countries people have immigrated from, and you think of like the dumpiest dump you've seen in the United States, like that's nothing.
Yeah,
compared to where
it's a palace.
Yeah, like some of these people literally built like a hut out of like just garbage and debris. And they have like it's just it's like the old Hoovervilles, I guess. Like it's just it's almost like a homeless encampment.
I remember like 2 or 3 years ago, I came back from a property we no longer manage, like in a total Spanish neighborhood. And I said something to you in the office about it, just the overall condition. And they had a young kid there. And I was like, and I think that the baby was like my son's age at the time, and it struck a nerve. And you're like, Andrew, like compared to where they came from, that's the Taj Mahal. Like it's a big upgrade. And you're right. Like
I don't know if I said that.
Yeah, it was something like that. But comparatively, where they're escaping, where they're fleeing from is so bad that even the most crummy looking house is a huge upgrade for them.
Yeah, and listen, there's something to admire about that, because like they're willing to live in like a rough condition to kind of make the American dream, which I appreciate. You just have to come here legally to do it.
Yeah,
but, all right. So let's touch on sales a little bit. I know this maybe is more my speed than your speed, but so with sales, there's two things I'm going to touch on. And what I will say is, I don't know, read this on the internet, so obviously you can't believe everything you read online, but there is supposedly some data out there that suggests that a portion of the housing market is owned by illegal immigrants. And by pushing them back out of purchasing a home, which, yes, they have been able to do that in the past. I'll explain in a minute. By pushing them out of having the ability to purchase a home, it would actually cause downward pressure and even potentially cause prices to drop nationally around 8% for 4% in properties between $250,000 to $500,000. Okay. Where can you buy a property in New Jersey for $250,000?
Maybe a condo?
Yeah. Where? Probably like Salem County or
South.
something. Yeah. So I don't know how much that applies to New Jersey, but if an illegal immigrant is going to buy a house, they're not buying $1 million home. They're not buying a $500,000 home. They're buying a cheaper property. So hearing that, you're like, yeah, I could see that. Because you just took a portion of buyers out of that price range, right? So if you've got, I'm making this number up, guys. If you've got 1 million people looking for housing between, a quarter million to $500,000, and now you cut 10% out, right? You just lost 10% demand, right? And the value of anything is based on supply and demand.
Yeah.
So I could see that. And then the more telling number was above 500,000, prices would increase because of the loss of construction labor.
Oh, right, yeah.
Right? Because now you're not paying this guy or gal, whatever, $20 an hour. You got to pay 35, right? So your labor price almost doubled. And then the third interesting point about that is rentals, rents would drop between 12 and 18%.
Wow.
That's a lot.
It's considerable.
And I go back to what I've seen in New Jersey this year, where I literally just got off the phone with somebody. It was like, they wanted a high rent in Plainfield. It's like, well, I'm just putting this out here. The rental market is a little soft right now. So I don't want you to think, one thing where it's kind of the other.
Yeah.
So I do think that has had an effect on rental rates. But with respect to sales, so there was two mortgage programs. The first was a DACA mortgage. And DACA was basically, I think that was passed during the Biden administration, which basically, if you were born here illegally, your parents immigrated over here, and you were, I guess, an illegal immigrant as a child, right? And you've lived here for a long time. Eventually, I think it was a pathway to citizenship.
Yeah.
Right, yeah. But at the end of the day, you were still an illegal immigrant. Well, they allowed those people to get mortgages starting in 2021. And then the Trump administration came in this year and was like, there's not going to be any more of that, right? So it doesn't matter how you feel about that, guys, but what that did is it just took X amount of people out of the housing market, not just in New Jersey, nationally, right? So let's say that's let's think about it with me for a second. How many, what percentage of people looking for housing is qualify for a DACA mortgage? It's got to be 1%, right? Okay.
Yeah,
fine.
pretty minimal.
The next one, and I believe this is still in place, is ITIN loans, ITIN loans. If you have an ITIN number, they would qualify you for an ITIN loan. Now, what you have to remember is these are seen as more high-risk loans. Why? Because the person does not have legal status in that country, right? So the 30-year mortgage rate in the United States right now might be 7%. An ITIN loan, it might be 12%.
Yeah.
So I would argue it's almost predatory, right? But the banks are trying to figure out a way to make money. So I still think they have ITIN loans in place. But what I've read online is mortgage lenders have said that people are not applying for them.
Right, because they're afraid of blowback.
They're afraid, period, of getting deported. They don't want to stick their neck out there.
Yeah.
Right. So again, what percentage of people looking for housing nationally? Maybe 1%. Right. So that's taken some people out of the housing market.
Yeah.
And then you have, which has been coming out, Redfin came out with one study, and I've seen it repeated all over social media that for the first time in years, there's more sellers than buyers in the market. Right. Which is a good thing, by the way. That's the market correcting itself. So you have what I would argue Trump's immigration policies are pulling illegal immigrants out of the market for buying homes, and I would argue out of the market for renting them. Okay, and then at least with sales, you have more people selling their home, and then I would even argue with rentals. You've had a lot of buildup of like multifamily dwellings, of apartment buildings, all that stuff. So I think it's been interesting with housing. I don't know how much that's affecting the housing market, but I would say like a sliver. And I go back to what I just said with like those numbers.
Yeah.
I could see it affecting like the cheaper housing.
Yeah.
Where you have a little bit less demand, right?
Yeah.
Like, does that not make sense?
That makes total sense. That's where they're going to go.
Yeah. So I think if I could summarize it, AI style, Trump's immigration policies has been a net positive for the affordability of rentals and homes so far. Only because I think that he's sucking illegal immigrants out of the economy.
Right.
Right. And so there's less competition for rentals. There's less competition for houses.
Yeah.
I think it really applies more towards rentals than purchasing a home.
Absolutely.
But I don't think it's a coincidence that like what we've seen at this company, and we're exposed to a lot of these markets in New Jersey, that they've become a lot softer, the rental markets.
We've noticed that for several months. So could you summarize it in an oversimplified way to say illegal immigration, good for landlords, bad for, tenants that are of American descent, naturalized citizens? That's kind of what it sounds like to me. It's great for property owners.
That's me going based on our own anecdotal evidence.
Yeah.
Like the last 5 years, like under Biden, man, like housing was booming.
Yeah.
Right. And like same thing with rentals, right? You rented it pretty quickly. We would have a couple hiccups, but like this year has been the first year in a while where I'm like, man, like it's
I think
slow.
there's some hesitancy because like we've only been 6 months into this new administration. People are,
That's just me reading the tea leaves, but that's kind of what I think. So that's what I want to share with you guys. So in a nutshell, construction, labor could potentially get more expensive. Rentals, I think there's going to be downward pressure on rentals, especially with all the building that they've been doing everywhere. They're building,
which is good if you're a renter.
It is good, man. Like, dude, rents have gone up like an absurd amount of money the last 4 years, just like everything has, right? So like, like I know landlords listening like don't want to hear that, but like guys, like renters are people too, man.
Yeah.
Like that's a good thing. Like if rental market's soft for a little bit, because at the end of the day, if you're a landlord, you want the guy or gal living in your apartment to actually be able to afford the rent.
Yeah, and you want that stability,
right? And you don't want the rent to be so high that they've got to bring in 8 people.
Yeah,
to afford it. So I think that's a good thing. And then with sales, I don't really know if there's a story there yet with respect to illegal immigration affecting that. I think it's many things, but definitely, I would say in the cities in New Jersey that have heavy immigrant populations, I definitely think Trump's immigration policies are affecting rentals in a positive way for renters and probably a little bit of a negative way for landlords. Right. So I think that's what we'll leave it. If you guys care to disagree, or if you're even still listening at this point and you want to DM me on Instagram or leave a comment, be happy to hear what you guys have to say. And if not, we'll see you guys on the next one.
Thanks for listening to the New Jersey Real Estate Investor Podcast. Make sure to subscribe so you don't miss the next episode. Until next time.